Welcome to NovoEDTalks, a podcast for authentic, honest conversations about talent development and the people shaping it. On this show, we sit down with leaders across learning and development, mentorship, leadership development, HR, and people strategy to talk about what's really working, what's changing, and what they're learning along the way. These aren't surface-level interviews. They're candid conversations about building skills, developing leaders, supporting managers, and creating experiences that actually move organizations forward. Before we jump in, a quick word about NovoED. Founded at Stanford's Social Algorithms Lab in 2012, NovoED is a people-centric talent development platform built for enterprises and training providers. Business transformation starts with people, and people perform better on NovoED. In today's fast-changing landscape, upskilling requires a new approach. NovoED makes it easy to move beyond the talent development status quo by combing social, collaborative, cohort-based learning with real-world application. The result is future-ready talent built on a platform designed to turn learning into measurable impact. Now, let's meet our guests for today's NovoEDTalks episode. Talks podcast, a space for talent development trailblazers to get real. My name is Melissa Fisk. I'm the producer of the NovoEDTalks podcast, and today I am joined by Adriana Bellomo, who is the Associate Director of Learning and Development at a biopharmaceutical solutions organization. Adriana is a learning and organizational development leader with a unique background spanning behavioral neuroscience, microbiology, workforce development, and leadership. Her career has taken her from laboratory operations to leading global learning initiatives, combining a passion for science, emotional intelligence, and adult learning. With experience in coaching, process optimization, and organizational development, Adriana is dedicated to helping people grow meaningful skills and perform at their highest potential. She is particularly interested in the intersection of human learning, human behavior, and emergent technologies, and how organizations can create environments where people continuously learn, adapt, and thrive. Adriana, we absolutely love that here. So thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to hear your perspectives on today's episode. Welcome to the NovoEDTalks podcast.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this episode.
Awesome. Well, why don't you start by just introducing yourself a little bit more and talking a little bit more about your background?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Adriana Bellomo. I'm an Associate Director of Learning and Development at a biopharmaceutical solutions organization. My role is really centered around helping people and helping clinical employees build their knowledge, skills, and confidence that that will help them be successful in their roles and continue growing throughout their careers. At its core, my job is helping people perform at their best and learning something that's practical, meaningful, and connected to the work they do every day.
That's awesome and so important. I mean, I find that, most of the folks that we have on here don't have as broad of a background as you do. So that's super fascinating and super interesting to us. I love that you're kind of like combining all of these passions that you have to help individuals. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
very lucky.
yeah, no, it's great. Why don't you talk a little bit more about like how you address kind of some of the learners that you're supporting and their, biggest pressures or challenges that they're currently facing in their day to day?
Sure. So I honestly think the biggest challenge today isn't that people don't have enough information. It's the exact opposite. We have a lot of information. There's more than we've ever had, right? So every day we're surrounded by new articles, podcasts, AI tools, software updates, online courses, and then you have experts telling us what we should learn next. And if you're naturally curious like I am, that's so exciting, but it's also very overwhelming. So I think the real challenge it isn't finding the information anymore. It's figuring out what's actually worth your time. So people are constantly asking themselves questions like, should I learn this new AI platform? Is this new technology actually going to help me? And like, is this skill going to matter in 6 months from now? And they're trying to answer all those questions on top of doing their full time job, right? So I think that's where pressure comes from. And we used to worry about having access to information, but now we have to learn to filter it. And for me, one of the most valuable skills today is discernment. So it's being able to step back and ask what actually creates value, what aligns with my goals, and what's worth investing my time in. And one important thing I always say is just because something's new or trending doesn't automatically make it important. And I think right now we've reached a point where prioritization has become just as valuable as learning itself. And the professionals that are going to thrive aren't necessarily the ones that can consume the most. It's the ones that know how to evaluate it, question it, and focus on what really matters in their day to day.
Absolutely. I think that's something that's so top of mind for us here right now and for everyone really they're navigating that especially as AI is around where it can help produce more content, but that's maybe not what definitely not what anyone necessarily needs at this point. If you kind of picture the ideal state of learning or talent development, what does that actually look like in practice to you?
So, when I think about the ideal state of learning, I always come back to one simple idea, which is learning shouldn't be an event. It should be a part of how we work, right? So, most of us grew up thinking that learning happened in a classroom, right? We all sat through lectures, we took notes, we passed a test, and then we moved on to the next topic. And that model absolutely has its place, especially when you're learning foundational knowledge or topics like compliance and safety. But as adults, I don't think that's where our biggest growth happens. If I look back at my own career, I can't honestly point to one course that changed everything for me. The biggest lessons came from doing something that I've never done before. I was getting assigned a project that felt just outside my comfort zone. I was making mistakes. It's asking questions, having a mentor that challenged my thinking, and then going home afterwards, researching something because I realized there was more that I wanted to understand. And that's how expertise develops, right? So, like, you experience something, you reflect on it, you adjust, then you try again. And that's why I've always been a huge believer in exponential learning. So, learning the fundamentals first, understanding the why, then going to apply it, and then having a manager or coach or even a peer provide feedback when you hit a roadblock because you will hit roadblocks, right? Like it's natural. And that's where the learning happens. Um, I also think sometimes we put too much responsibility on organizations, right? So, like, organizations have the responsibility to create opportunities, provide resources, and build a culture where learning is encouraged. But at the end of the day, learning's personal. No one could be curious for you. No one can practice for you, and no one can ask the questions you're afraid to ask. Like, the people I've seen grow the fastest aren't necessarily the smartest people in the room, but they're the ones who stay curious, they ask for the feedback, they're willing to admit they don't know something, and then they actively go looking for answers. So creating an environment where that's welcome, that's also very important for your ideal state. And to me, that's what great learning looks like. It's not something that happens once a quarter when you attend a workshop or you attend a class. It becomes a part of your everyday and how you approach your work. It's
Yeah,
a habit.
absolutely, Adriana. That was so well put. And there's so many things I love that you said there. And mostly that's what a very, like, real, authentic learning environment sounds like. I really loved the piece right there where you said, having, like, a mentor or a coach when you hit a roadblock to kind of help walk you through that, right? Because I think those can actually be some phenomenal learning experiences, right? If you have someone to kind of, like, help ease maybe the failure aspect of that where like when you can talk with someone where it's like, oh, I can't get past this or I'm really struggling with this, and it's like, hey, that's okay, let's find a way to like circumnavigate that together. And that role of a mentor or a coach in that particular moment can turn that roadblock into, I think, a phenomenal learning experience. But really just like love what you said overall there. Like, I think that sounds like a very honest, genuine, like, place that people can learn from. Now, what would you say is kind of the biggest blocker from keeping us in that type of, like, ideal learning environment at this point?
Well, I think we've made tremendous progress in how adults learn. And the interesting part is we already know what works, right? We know adults learn best when learning is relevant. We know they learn through experience, and we know coaching and feedback matter. We know application is far more powerful than memorization. And the challenge is that we don't always design learning in that way. In a lot of organizations, success is measured by things like attendance, completion rates, or assessment scores. And those metrics do tell you that someone showed up to your event or they showed up to your training and they did it, but they don't actually tell us whether anything actually changed. So, did someone make a better decision afterwards? Did they solve problems differently? Did performance improve? Those are much harder questions to answer, and I think they're ones that actually matter. Another big gap is or a challenge is that the pace of change has increased, right? So, like, a few years ago, you could spend months of becoming an expert in one tool or a new technology before something new came out. Today, it feels like you learned one thing and 3 new things popped up, and you're like, "Okay." So, AI is probably the best example of that, right? So, it's changing so quickly, and people feel like they're constantly playing catch up, which I think creates a very interesting tension, right? So, like, people are consuming more information than ever before. They have less time to actually practice, reflect, and build mastery. And without practice, information doesn't become a capability. So I think that's a gap, right? And then the last gap I see is ownership, going back to what I was mentioning before, that like sometimes we think development is something someone else gives us. The onus falls on the learner or on the employee. If we can't wait for the next training, the next class, or the next certificate. But in reality, like, we really we have to go and put ourselves out there. We have to be the ones asking questions. We have to be experimenting, seeking feedback, trying new approaches. Learning has always been a partnership. It's not
Yeah.
it's not just one-sided.
I love that. I'm writing that down. Learning has always been a partnership. I just think that's
Yeah,
a beautiful way to put that. Um, I think
thank
that's very relevant, and many organizations can relate to both kind of your ideal state and, like, where the biggest gap still is. Switching gears a little bit and kinda jumping back into something you just said about, like, going beyond just, like, completion rates, how are you designing learning experiences to ensure that learning actually does stick beyond just attendance or completion?
So one of the biggest lessons I learned early in my career is that not every performance problem is a training problem, right? And I actually think that's
Ooh,
one of the
love
biggest
that.
misconceptions in learning and development. Someone comes to L&D and they say, "We need a training." My first question always is, "Okay, maybe, but what is the actual problem you're trying to solve here?" Right? So sometimes the answer is training, but other times it's not. Maybe it's a process that's overly complicated. Maybe expectations aren't clear. Maybe people don't have the right resources, and maybe leadership isn't reinforcing the behavior, right? So if we immediately jump to creating a course, we'll spend months building something that never addresses the root cause. So I like to approach learning more as a consultant than someone who takes orders. So instead of asking what kind of training should we build, I ask, what do we want people to do differently? Right. And that completely changes the conversation. Once we know the behavior we're trying to create, then we can work backwards. And then I start to think about the learner's experience, right? So how can they practice? How can they receive feedback? How can managers reinforce what they're learning? How can peers learn from one another? Because if learning ends when someone clicks complete on an e-learning course, then we really haven't accomplished much, right? Adults learn by doing. They think about this. I always like to use this analogy. Like when you learn to drive. No one becomes a good driver because they read the driver's manual, right? You read the rules, you take the test, and then you have to get behind the wheel. And that's where you're hitting the cones, you don't know how to parallel park, but you have
Yeah.
somebody coaching you through that. Okay? And then eventually you stop thinking about every little step, right? You may run over a curb here and there after you get your license, but that's natural, you know? But that's the kind of like that's
Some more so than others.
listen, I don't wanna talk about how many curves I ran over.
Can
That's what
relate, can relate.
that's what we're trying to create when we're creating workplace learning. Knowledge that becomes behavior, behavior that becomes habit, and habit that ultimately that improves performance. To me, that's what a great learning design looks like. It's creating experiences that help build confidence over time, not just consume information within an hour.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, and I love that analogy. I think that's so good because driver's ed is exactly like, think everyone can relate to that because everyone's been through that and they understand how they learned how to do that. Again, some better than others. Uh, but, Adriana, what signals kind of do you look for that, learners are truly engaged, in this kind of process? Is there certain, things that you look for during courses or afterwards or in experimentation or things like that? Talk to that a little bit.
Sure. So, from my experience, we've fallen into that trap, assuming just because someone completed a training, learning happened. But we've all had experiences where we sat in a meeting or a class, nodded our heads like this, right? Maybe even passed the test, and
Yeah.
then completely forgot about what you learned. within, like, minutes or even a week later, right? But completion tells us someone participated. It doesn't necessarily say that anything changed, and for me, that engagement starts after the learning experience. So, are people asking questions? Are they bringing examples back to their own work? Are they connecting to what they learned in real situations? Those are really good signs, but the best indicator is ownership. So, when someone starts saying things like, I actually tried this, or I read another article about this, and I talked to my manager about applying it to my everyday work. That's when I know learning is becoming personal. Another thing I pay attention to is whether people actually start teaching their coworkers or their peers about
I
what they
love
learned,
that.
right?
Mhm.
So we all experience, right? Like we all learn something, and we're like so excited, and we immediately want to tell somebody else.
No.
That
Yeah.
right? Like you've been in that situation. That
Yeah.
tells me that learning had enough value on somebody where they felt compelled to share it, and I think managers play a huge role here. They're often the first person to notice change, and maybe someone starts asking better questions during meetings, or they become more confident in making decisions, right? They're not running everything up the flagpole. They're solving problems independently instead of escalating everything. Those behavioral shifts tell me that there's a much richer story than a completion report ever could. And at the end of the day, I don't think engagement is measured by how active someone was during a training. I think it's measured by what they chose to do once the training's over.
Oh gosh, absolutely. I love that. I love the teaching the as like teaching someone else as a signal because I think that's so true. We as humans inherently want to do that when we're like, "Oh, look at this cool new thing I learned how to do," you
Yeah,
know? And so my
yeah.
kids do that, when they come home excited from school, like, "Look what I learned how to do," you know? And so I think that's like a very natural inherent
Yeah.
human trait to want to do that.
Yeah, I had a professor, in college, and one of the things he told me, he was like, "The best way to know if you truly understand something is if you have the ability to teach somebody
Teach-
else,
Yeah.
because if you can teach them and answer all their questions, then you truly know the knowledge." And that to me was, like, it really stuck. It stuck with me
Yeah.
all through college, and it stuck with me throughout my career, so
That's awesome. There isn't there a phrase, it's like learn it, teach it, do it, or learn one, do one, teach one or something, I
yeah.
think it is.
Learn one learn
Totally
one,
butchering
read
that.
one, learn one, do one.
Right, right. There you go. Thank you. Um, Adriana, earlier you mentioned, the importance of discernment. That's what, a lot of folks nowadays are calling power skills or durable skills, which is a switch up from, focusing on soft skills. How, are you thinking about skills development in general, especially as AI accelerates change so quickly?
Well, so I actually love this conversation because I think the name changed, but the importance of the skills have only grown, right? So
Right.
things like critical thinking, judgment, adaptability, communication, and decision making have always mattered. But
Right.
what's changed is the environment we worked in. So I'm a millennial and I've had the unique experience of watching the internet become a part of everyday life. I remember when you wanted an answer, you had to go find it. Today I can ask AI almost any question and it gets me an answer in seconds, which is it's incredible, also very scary. Um, but it's also changed the skills that we need. So the challenge isn't finding information anymore. It's asking, is this accurate? Is it complete? Are the sources reliable? Does this apply to my situation? And that's where judgment comes in, right? So it's incredibly important that you know how to trace back your source to know that it is credible because without that, then you're spreading misinformation and we don't want that in learning and development. So AI can generate information quickly. It can't always understand the nuances of your organization, your team, your customers, or the specific problem you're trying to solve. That's still our job, right? As humans, that's our job. And I've started describing AI as a thought partner instead of an expert. It's fantastic for brainstorming. It's fantastic for helping me organize my thinking, making spreadsheets. Um, it's great for accelerating research, but I never want to outsource my own judgment. In many ways, I think AI is making human skills more valuable, not less. It's easier to access the information, but the value now that we really need to make sure we hold on to is knowing that we can look at it and we can evaluate if it's true or not. And I think that professionals who will stand out over the next decade or two aren't the ones that know the most. They're the ones who are able to ask the questions, challenge assumptions, connect the ideas, and make more thoughtful decisions when there isn't a perfect answer, right? A lot of people think AI is gonna give them like, it's gonna spit out the perfect answer and tell them what to do next, and there's gonna be no problems after you do it. That's not the case. You really need to make sure you're understanding what it's saying and you're connecting it back and making decisions based on what you know. Because you can always pivot, right? That's the other thing. I think there's a lot of people that think once you make a decision, you can't change it. That's not the case. You can always change it. But it's having that human capability, that deep thought, that critical thinking of knowing when to pivot to. So,
Yeah. No, absolutely, and that's a hard skill set to have in general. Um, I do wanna get back into AI in a moment, but,
yeah.
just for thinking about kind of what the programs that you're building, how are you building programs that are kind of, like, encouraging and teaching and growing these human, like, capabilities at the same time as balancing, the technical skill sets folks still need to have to do their jobs? Because there are specific jobs out there, right, where it's like there still is a technical skill set component that we can't just rely on AI to help us with. Medical professionals is a big one. It's like,
Right.
yeah,
Well,
absolutely. Can't be using AI for
yeah.
that.
Well, I don't think it's an either or conversation, right? So technical skills and human skills are partners. Technical skills teach us how to do something. Human skills help us decide whether we should do it, when we should do it, why we're doing it in the first place. Technology changes incredibly fast. And think about how many software platforms have come and gone in the last 10 years. Think about how much your iPhone has evolved, right? So or how quickly these AI tools are even evolving. Those tools will continue to change, but the ability to think critically, to communicate, to adapt, to collaborate, those skills have a longer shelf life. And that's why I don't think organizations should treat durable skills as separate from technical development. They should be embedded together. Um, so like let's go back to AI, for example. Learning how to write prompts is useful, but knowing how to question the output, recognize bias, validate information, understand context, those are all skills that actually create value. I'm going to use another analogy, right? So think about GPS. GPS can tell you the fastest route, but if the road's closed or there's flooding or construction, you still have to make a decision. Technology can provide recommendations, people provide judgment, and the most successful professionals I've worked with are the ones that continue investing in both. So when you're building programs, you need to think about that. Um, and everyone's excited to learn new tech, but they're also equally committed to strengthening the skills that technology can't easily replace. Things like curiosity, adaptability, communication, empathy, and I'm really going to emphasize critical thinking here. That critical thinking skill that we talk about, it seems that a lot of people aren't using it as much. And we need to get back in that habit of building it and questioning. Like, we need to question things. It's okay to question. And I think that will be the biggest differentiator for the future work, especially when you're
Yeah.
building programs. You need to build that critical thinking skill in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So well said. And I love your analogies. I think that is a great way to help people kind of visualize and understand this and think about that. So I think that is super important. The critical thinking one is one that we're always, I think, going to have to focus on. I think we're going to really have to pay attention to like how we're teaching that and how we're encouraging folks to use that skill set and strengthen that skill set. It'll be one of the things that's so easy to not do because we have AI. Like people could very quickly become reliant on just like, oh, let me just, use AI for whatever. And that
Yeah,
is going to be something that we really have to, I think, work hard on it, encouraging folks not to do and to build that critical thinking muscle, if you will.
I agree 100%.
We talked about earlier some of the, like signals of like how you're like looking to see if like learning is actually sticking with individuals. Going back to kind of like measuring in general, do you have any kind of performance metrics that you're looking at to, measure the application of learning today in your programs?
So I'm going to use another analogy. Um,
I love it.
this one's a fitness analogy that I think everyone can relate to. So imagine you decide you want to get stronger. You can go watch workout videos, you can read articles about exercise, you can buy all the right equipment, but none of those things actually make you stronger. The only thing that does is consistently applying what you learned over time, right? So learning in the workplace is exactly the same thing. Completing a course is like buying a gym membership. It's a great first step, but it's not the outcome we're really after, right? So the question I always ask is, are people getting better at what they do? Are they making the better decisions? Are they solving problems more independently? Are they reaching proficiency faster? Are they becoming more confident? Those are things I'm interested in measuring. I also think it's important to recognize that learning is both an individual and an organizational, right? Like you have learning at an individual level and then you have learning at an organizational level. And every person learns differently. Some people pick things up quickly, others need more coaching and practice, right? That's completely normal to have a learning curve. So if you only focus on one person's performance, you might miss the bigger picture. But on the flip side, if you only look at organizational metrics, you can overlook where individuals are struggling or where additional support's needed. So I like to combine both, right? Look at how your organization's doing. Is their quality output good, right? Are we meeting client deadlines? And then look at an individual standpoint. Individually, like, is the quality of the work that they're producing, is that good as well? So that's to me, that's the best approach is combining both perspectives. And you can look at quantitative metrics like quality, productivity, proficiency, and operational performance. But I also think qualitative feedback matters too. So, like engaging with managers, what are they observing? What are employees saying? Are more people like confident when you walk into a meeting? Are the teams collaborating differently? Are they picking up what they learned in their communication training? Like, are they speaking differently? Are they the way they're framing their questions? Are you having a better working environment? At the end of the day, the purpose of learning isn't knowledge acquisition, it's improved performance, right? So, like, if people are doing their jobs more effectively in 6 months after the learning experience than they were before, then I think we've created real value, and that ultimately is what success looks like to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. I love that concept of having like two different sets of metrics for the individual and the organization because I think that's important and that keeps us, also focused on that individual personal experience and also just like where the company is going as a whole. I think that's brilliant. Adriana, jumping back into AI because of course we need to talk about AI some more.
Yeah, we love
Yeah.
AI.
We've talked a lot about it kind of like conceptually, but in practice, is AI part of your learning strategy and your learning programs today? And if so, kind of where are you seeing the most benefit?
So, in my day to day and from my personal experiences, I absolutely would agree that AI is part of every day. So the biggest value I see in AI is that it shortens the distance between curiosity and learning. So what I mean by that is like years ago, if you wanted to learn something new, I'd probably spend an hour searching through articles, watching videos, comparing different opinions, and then trying to piece it all together. Today, I can start that learning process in minutes. I can ask questions, I can challenge ideas, I can request examples, explore different perspectives after validating all the information, of course. But it's almost like having a conversation with someone who helps you organize your thinking. But I think there's that important distinction, right? So AI should accelerate learning, it should not replace learning. I still want to wrestle with the ideas, I still want to challenge the assumptions, I still want to think critically because if AI starts doing all that, to your point, right, it's actually weakening the skills we're trying to develop. So if you become solely dependent upon AI, you're weakening your critical thinking skills, like we mentioned before. And for me, AI is best when it removes friction. So, like, get me to the interesting part faster, right? Like, when you sit in a movie theater and they have all the previews, eh, just get me to the movie. That's why streaming's so great. But that's AI.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's so well put too that the biggest benefit is that it shortens the distance between curiosity and learning. That's such a powerful statement. And I think that, it doesn't eliminate the learning journey, it just quickens our, like, approach to it, or it gets us there a little bit quicker, so I think that's a really phenomenal way of putting that. Do you have any kind of, like, guardrails or design principles, that you're using to ensure that AI enhances human learning and connection versus diluting it?
Yes. So the biggest one for me is that AI should remain the assistant, not the decision maker. I use AI almost every day, right? So it helps me brainstorm. It challenges my assumptions or points me towards perspectives I didn't consider. I think that's fantastic. But again, when it comes to making decisions for me, human judgment has to stay in the loop. Context matters, experience matters, relationships matters. Those are all things that people bring to the table. The second principle is preserving human connections. So the most meaningful learning experiences I ever had weren't the courses, right? They were the conversations with the mentors. They were asking the mentors difficult questions. They're sharing stories with my peers, leaders that gave honest feedback. AI can absolutely support those moments, but it shouldn't replace them.
Mm,
And I always ask myself, is this making people more capable or is it making them more dependent? Because there's a big difference there, right? And
yeah.
if
Yeah.
AI sorry.
No, I just it's I love what you said there, is it more capable or more dependent? And I think that's a really great distinction that, for a framework. But continue, I didn't mean to
Yeah.
cut you off. Love that.
No, no, no worries. So, if AI helps people think more deeply, learn faster, and make better decisions, then it's doing exactly what it should do, right? If it starts replacing curiosity, limiting critical thinking or problem solving, then I think we've crossed a line. And, with great power comes great responsibility. Technology should amplify human capability, it should not substitute it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. I think that's a really good, like I said, really great framework, a really great, like, kind of guiding principle for using AI. Adriana, as you're looking to the next few years, what do you believe L&D leaders need to unlearn and what do they need to double down on?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things we need to unlearn is this idea that learning is synonymous with training. So, for decades, our profession has been incredibly focused on building courses, delivering content, and measuring completion. Those things matter, but I don't think they're enough anymore. Information's everywhere, people can access knowledge on demand. So, our role is evolving, and I think the future of L&D is much more about enabling performance than producing training. And that means becoming a strategic partner to organizations, acting as consultants, acting as problem solvers. Instead of waiting for someone to request a course, we should be helping leaders understand what's actually driving the performance. And sometimes the answer will be training, sometimes it'll be coaching, sometimes it's going to be better tools, and sometimes it's process improvements. But our value comes from solving problems, not just delivering the learning. And I also think we need to become more comfortable experimenting, right? So, with the pace of change, like we talked about earlier, it doesn't allow us to spend 18 months trying to build perfect solutions. Sometimes we need to pilot an idea, learn from it, improve it, then iterate it. And that's how innovation happens. And I think some organizations will be more successful over the next decade if they aren't necessarily focused on creating the most trainings. And I'm always a fan of experimenting with caution, right? So you want to pilot, you want to try new things. I'm a fan of ambitious ideas. I'm a fan of innovation, but do it smart, right? Take bite-sized pieces, experiment with that caution, and then pivot as you need. And creating that environment where you can do that, where we're the one as L&D partners, we're creating environments where learning, experimentation, feedback, and continuous improvement become a part of everyday work. I think that's where we have an incredible opportunity to lead.
Absolutely. That's so well put, Adriana. I love that. And I think that's very in line with a lot of the conversations that we're having over here. So, totally relate to that. And I love do we need another learning? I think that is something that like
Yes.
everyone should be asking themselves all of the time. Do we really need another learning?
Yeah. How can this be solved without sitting through an e-learning course? Yeah.
Yes. Adriana, this conversation has been great. But to close, what's one lesson that you've learned as an L&D leader that you wish you had known earlier on in your career?
Hmm. Okay. I think that's a great question. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is the importance of staying a learner yourself. When you work in learning and development, it's really easy to spend all your time and energy thinking about everyone else's growth, right? You're designing programs, you're coaching leaders, you're solving problems and helping other people develop. But somewhere along the way, I realized one of my biggest professional breakthroughs wasn't coming from work at all. It was coming from moments when I was a beginner. So I think honestly, one of the best things I've ever done for myself was finding hobbies outside of work to learn something completely new. So for me, that's drumming and coaching soccer. On the surface, neither of those have anything to do with learning and development, but they probably taught me so much as than learning than any other book that I've read. So like when I'm playing the drums with a band, I'm constantly learning new songs, listening to other musicians, adjusting in real time, like trying to figure out how to keep everything grounded, right? So I'm not showing that I'm freaking out. I have to keep pace and then like figuring out how to work together towards a common goal of creating a very nice song that everybody can listen. Sometimes things don't go perfect. Sometimes someone speeds up or they miss a cue or they fumble their solo. But other time you adapt, you communicate, you recover and that's learning, right? So like those experiences remind me what it's like to struggle through something new, to practice and to improve little by little. And it doesn't mastery doesn't happen overnight, right? You have to keep going, you have to keep putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations. And then on the flip side, coaching soccer probably taught me more than ever. So one lesson that sticks with me is realizing that just because I understand something and I can explain it, doesn't mean everyone else around me does. So like you can explain the drill to 12 different people and they might need to hear it differently. Like one person needs to see it, one person needs to try it, one person may need extra encouragement while they're doing it. And sometimes more people, like they need feedback after they attempt it. And that completely changed the way I think about teaching adults. So
Yeah.
it would be
No.
get a hobby and put yourself as a beginner.
I love that. I think that's so great. And can relate to the coaching thing kind of similarly and having small children where it's like that has
Yes.
helped me be like, "Oh, okay." And different children, like being like, "This one gets it when I say it this way. This one does not." So like I have to figure out a different way to say it. But I love that. I think that's such a beautiful thing, and I think what's really special about that too, Adriana, is that that keeps us human, right? Like, having hobbies, like, getting out there, interacting with other people, that keeps us human, and that strengthens a lot of, those, like, durable power skills that we talked about too, where it's just, like, it keeps you very connected to being a human and working with other humans, and that, I think, is so, so important, especially in an age of AI. One last question for you now, though, Adriana. What is your favorite song to play on the drums? Had to
Oh, okay. All right. So, um, honestly, it would be between Not Fade Away by The Grateful Dead, and then recently I've been playing Just a Girl because it's one of the songs that the band is covering, and that one's been a lot of fun to play because it's fast and you get to just kinda rock out to it. So
I love it, and also as a millennial, will always be a no doubt girl, so can can relate. Adriana, thank you so much for joining us today on the NovoEd Talks podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure having you on here, and I know our listeners are just gonna absolutely love this episode.
thank you, Melissa. It was a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate your time and consideration.
Awesome, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of NovoEd Talks.